I came home from a deployment expecting two things: quiet and the same piece of land I'd left behind. Instead, I got neither. Because sometime while I was overseas, my neighbor didn't just step over a boundary line. He carved straight through it with an excavator like it didn't exist. And the worst part is, for a while, he actually thought he'd gotten away with it. So yeah, that's where this starts. I own a hillside lot just outside a small town called Red Hollow, Tennessee. Nothing fancy, just a few acres of wooded land I picked up back in 2020, right before everything in the world got weird. It's steep on one side, drops off hard toward the left, and I'd been slowly working on it between deployments, clearing brush, setting up drainage, getting plans drawn for a retaining wall I couldn't quite afford yet. It wasn't some polished dream property, not yet, but it was mine, and I'd put enough sweat into that slope to know every inch of it. Now, to the left of my property was a guy named Darren Pike, early 50s, built like a man who used to do construction for a living and never quite stopped thinking he still ran every job site he stood on. He had this gravel driveway that sloped down toward his garage, but it ended awkwardly at this tight angle that made pulling in anything bigger than a pickup truck a real headache. And Darren, he had a boat. Not a small one either. Every time he brought that trailer in, it was this whole production, backing up, pulling forward, cutting the wheel, trying again. Sometimes it took him 5, 6 tries just to line it up right. I used to watch it sometimes when I was out working, not in a judgmental way, just noticing. And every once in a while, he'd catch me looking and throw out something like, "Yeah, this damn slope wasn't built for trailers," half laughing, half annoyed. One afternoon, maybe a couple months before I deployed, he walked over while I was marking out where I planned to extend my drainage trench. He stood there for a minute, hands on his hips, looking up at my hillside like he was studying it. "You ever thought about cutting into this a bit?" he asked, nodding toward the slope. I remember wiping sweat off my forehead, kind of squinting at him. "Eventually," I said. "Gonna need permits, engineering, all that. It's not a quick job." He chuckled, that kind of dismissive, low chuckle. "Permits are just paperwork that slows things down." That line stuck with me. At the time, I didn't think much of it. Just figured it was how guys like him talked. You know, always looking for the faster way around something. But then he said something else, a little quieter. If that slope came down a bit, I could run a straight shot from my drive. I didn't respond right away. Just looked at him, then back at the hillside. "That slope," I said, "is on my property." He gave this small shrug, like it wasn't a big deal. "Yeah, I know. Just saying, it'd be useful." That was the first moment something felt off. Not enough to start a problem, but enough that I mentally noted it. Like putting a pin in a map you might need later. A few weeks after that, I got orders. 13-month deployment. Not my first, probably wouldn't be my last. I spent the last couple days before leaving doing what I always do, locking things down, checking the perimeter, making sure nothing was left exposed. I padlocked the access gate, walked the entire boundary line, took photos from multiple angles. It sounds paranoid if you've never had land messed with before, but I've seen enough to know, if something goes wrong, documentation is everything. The day I left, I remember standing at the edge of that slope for a second longer than usual. The trees were still thick along the left side, roots holding the soil in place, everything exactly as it should be. It felt stable, predictable. I didn't think about Darren. Not once, the entire time I was gone. Deployment does that to you. It narrows your world down to what's right in front of you. Days blur together, priorities shift, and something like a piece of land back home becomes this distant, quiet thing in the back of your mind. Safe. Untouched. At least, that's what you tell yourself. 13 months later, I drove back into Red Hollow in the early afternoon. Same roads, same turns, same little gas station on the corner with the flickering sign. It all felt smaller somehow, like it always does when you come back from somewhere that demanded everything from you. And then I turned onto my road. At first, I couldn't quite place what was wrong. It was subtle, just a feeling that something didn't line up the way it used to. You ever get that? When a place you know by heart suddenly feels slightly off. I slowed the truck down, looked to the left, and that's when it hit me. The tree line, it was broken. There was a gap where there shouldn't have been one, a clean, unnatural cut slicing into the side of the hill. I actually pulled over right there, engine still running, just staring at it through the windshield like my brain was trying to reject what my eyes were telling it. I got out slowly, started walking toward it, boots crunching on gravel that I knew, immediately, wasn't mine. The closer I got, the worse it looked. What used to be a continuous slope was now carved out into this wide, flattened path. About 40 feet long, maybe 12 feet across, and cut deep enough that the natural grade of the hill had been completely altered. The soil was packed down, covered in crushed stone that had clearly been trucked in, not something that belonged there naturally. And then I saw the tire marks. Not old ones either, fresh, repeated tracks pressed into the gravel, leading straight from that cut, down into Darren's driveway. That's when the realization settled in. He hadn't just crossed onto my property. He'd built himself a road, and he'd been using it for months. I remember just standing there, hands on my hips, looking at that cut in the hillside, and thinking, this isn't a misunderstanding. This isn't some accident or boundary confusion. This was a decision. A deliberate, calculated decision made while I was gone. And in that moment, I felt something shift, not just anger, but something colder, more focused. Because if he thought I was going to come back, shrug, and let it slide, he didn't know me at all. I didn't go knocking on Darren's door. Not that day, not the next one either. I know that's what a lot of people expect, right? Storm over there, start yelling, demand answers. But I've learned the hard way that once you make it emotional, you lose control of how it ends. And I wasn't interested in yelling. I was interested in making this stick. So I walked the entire cut first. Slowly, taking it all in like I was surveying a crime scene. Because that's exactly what it was. The edges of the excavation were too clean to be accidental. You could still see where the bucket teeth had scraped into the soil. Roots from older trees were exposed and snapped, not naturally broken torn. Whoever did this didn't ease into it, they committed. I pulled my phone out and started recording. Wide shots, close-ups, angles from the top of the slope looking down, from the bottom looking up, every detail I could think of. The gravel was compacted tight, which told me it had been driven on repeatedly, not just dumped and left. This wasn't a one-day mistake. This was something he'd been using like it belonged to him. Then I noticed something that made my jaw tighten just a little more. There were 3 stumps along the edge of the cut, cleanly sawn, not broken. Mature hardwoods, the kind that take decades to grow. I walked over, crouched down, ran my hand across one of them, still solid, still fresh enough that the inner rings hadn't fully darkened yet. He didn't just dig into my land. He cleared it. And for some reason, that part hit me harder than the gravel, harder than the cut. Maybe because trees feel permanent. You expect them to be there when you come back. And now they weren't. I stood up, took a breath, and looked down toward his driveway. The path lined up perfectly, like it had always been meant to connect. Clean. Convenient. Convenient for him. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, scrolling through the photos I'd taken before deployment. Same angles, same hillside, intact, untouched. I matched them side by side with the new ones, and the difference was almost jarring. It wasn't just damage, it was transformation. That's when I made the call. Hey, I said when the line picked up. I've got a property issue, and I need to know how far I can push it. The attorney I worked with, Melissa Carter, didn't waste time with small talk. She listened while I laid everything out, start to finish, and every so often she'd stop me to ask for something specific, measurements, dates, whether I had documentation from before I left. I've got photos of everything, I told her. Time-stamped. Multiple angles. There was a brief pause on the line. Then a quiet, almost satisfied exhale. Good, she said. That helps more than you realize. I could hear her typing. What you're describing isn't just trespassing, she continued. This falls under unauthorized land disturbance, especially if he altered the grade and brought in fill material. That triggers state-level regulations. I leaned back in the chair. Meaning he would have needed an erosion and sediment control permit before doing any of that. And if he cleared trees, she paused again. That's another layer entirely. Timber removal without authorization can be assessed separately. I didn't say anything for a second. Just let that sink in. So this isn't small, I said. No, she replied. It's not small. The next few days moved fast. Faster than I expected. Melissa arranged for a geotechnical engineer to come out and assess the slope. The guy's name was Ron, mid-60s, quiet, the kind of person who didn't say much unless it mattered. He walked the site with me early one morning, boots sinking slightly into the disturbed soil as he moved along the cut. He didn't react much at first, just observed. Took notes. measured angles. But when he got to the deepest part of the excavation, he stopped, stood there for a moment, hands on his hips, then looked up at me. "How long has this been like this?" he asked. "Less than a year," I said. "Probably around 8, 9 months." He let out a low breath. "This slope wasn't designed to be cut like this," he said. "You've got disrupted drainage paths. Water's not going to move the way it used to. And without proper reinforcement," he gestured toward the exposed soil, "this is at risk of erosion, especially after heavy rain." I felt that cold, focused feeling come back. "Can it be fixed?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's not cheap." Later that afternoon, I got the report. $34,000. That was the estimate to remove the gravel, restore the natural grade, stabilize the slope, and re-establish proper drainage. And that didn't even include the trees. Melissa had already lined up an arborist to assess those. A younger guy, more talkative, but just as thorough. He counted rings, measured diameters, documented species. 3 mature hardwoods, he said, flipping through his notes. "Based on size and age, you're looking at about $8,400 in value." I actually let out a short laugh when he said that, not because it was funny, but because at that point the numbers were starting to feel unreal. Like this whole situation had escalated way past what Darren probably imagined when he first fired up that excavator. And we weren't done yet. Melissa filed with the county first, then escalated it to the state division that handles land and resource management. Within a week, an inspector showed up. Tall guy, weathered face, the kind of expression that says he's seen just about everything. He walked the cut, same as the others had. But unlike them, he shook his head almost immediately. "I haven't seen an unauthorized disturbance this size in a long time," he said. "Not without permits." He took his own set of photos, asked me a few questions, then glanced down toward Darren's property. "Does he know you're back?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. The inspector gave a small nod. "Well, he's about to." 3 days later, Darren called me. I didn't have his number saved, but I recognized the voice the second he started talking. "Hey," he said, a little too casually. "We should probably talk." I leaned back in my chair, phone on speaker, just letting him sit in that silence for a second. "About what?" I asked. Another pause. "About the land," he said. "There's been some confusion." I couldn't help it. I smiled a little at that. "Confusion," I repeated. "Is that what you're calling it?" His tone shifted slightly. "Look, I didn't think it was going to be a big deal. It's just a small cut, and it actually improves drainage if you think about it." "No." I cut in, calm but firm. "It improves your driveway." Silence. Then he tried a different angle. "I was planning to talk to you about it when you got back," he said. "We could have worked something out." I stood up, walked over to the window, looking out toward that hillside. "You had 13 months, I said quietly. "You didn't wait. You didn't ask. You didn't even leave a note." His voice tightened. "I didn't think you'd make it this big." That line, that's the one that stuck. Not an apology. Not even an acknowledgement of what he did. Just surprised that there were consequences. "Darren," I said, "you cut 40 feet into my land, removed trees, and built a road for yourself. This isn't big because I made it big." I paused. "It's big because you made it big." He didn't respond right away. And for the first time since the call started, he didn't sound confident anymore. "What do you want?" he asked. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because up until then, this was just damage. Now it was leverage. When Darren asked me, "What do you want?" it wasn't defiant anymore. It wasn't even frustrated. It sounded like something else, like he was finally starting to understand that this wasn't a quick conversation he could talk his way out of. And I remember standing there, looking out at that hillside, the cut still raw against the rest of the land, and realizing I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to threaten him. I didn't even need to negotiate yet. Because at that point, the facts were already doing all the work for me. "I want it fixed," I said. "Properly. Back to what it was, or as close as it can be." He exhaled slowly on the other end. "Yeah, okay. We can figure that out." "No," I said, still calm. "We already did figure it out." There was a pause, longer this time. "I've got a geotechnical report," I continued. "I've got an arborist assessment. And the state's already involved." That's when his tone changed again, not defensive, not dismissive, just tight. "You went to the state?" "Yeah," I said. "I did." Another silence. You could almost hear the math happening in his head, the realization stacking piece by piece. "What's this going to cost me?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted him to sit in that question for a second. Then I gave it to him straight. 34,000 for the slope, I said. 8,400 for the trees. And that doesn't include fines or legal. He let out a quiet, strained laugh. You're serious? Completely. That was the moment the conversation ended, even though neither of us hung up right away. There just wasn't anything left to say, not over the phone. After that, things moved into a different phase. Less talking, more documentation, filings, deadlines. Melissa handled most of it, and I stayed out of the way unless something needed my input. That was intentional. I didn't want this turning into a personal back and forth. I wanted it clean, structured, undeniable. We subpoenaed his equipment records. That was almost too easy. Turns out, Darren had rented the excavator about 8 months into my deployment. 4-day rental. The paperwork was still on file. And the gravel, same thing. Delivery invoice, clearly listing my property address as the drop site. When Melissa showed me those documents, she didn't say much. Just slid them across the table and gave me a look like, this is over. Because it was. Not emotionally, but legally. Yeah, it was done. Darren's attorney reached out a couple days later. Completely different tone than Darren had on the phone. Polite, careful, interested in resolving the matter efficiently. That's when you know. That's when you know it's real. There was some back and forth, mostly about timelines and scope of work, but not much argument on responsibility. They couldn't argue it. The evidence boxed them in from every direction. In the end, Darren agreed to cover everything. 34,000 for the remediation, 8,400 for the trees, 6,200 in accumulated state fines, because those didn't stop ticking while we were figuring things out. And on top of that, my legal fees, expert assessments, all of it. Just over $63,000 when it was all said and done. For a shortcut, the restoration started the following week. 18 days. That's how long it took to undo what he'd done in 4. Crew showed up early every morning. Heavy equipment, trucks, materials. The first thing they did was strip out all the gravel he'd put in, load by load, hauled it off like it never belonged there, because it didn't. Then they started rebuilding the slope, layering soil back in, compacting it properly, reshaping the grade to match its original contour as closely as possible, installing proper drainage channels, reinforcing the vulnerable sections, reseeding the surface so it could stabilize over time. I was there most days, not hovering, not interfering, just watching. There's something about seeing damage get reversed piece by piece that feels grounding, like you're taking control back in slow motion. And Darren? He watched too, from his back deck. Every single day, I'd catch glimpses of him sometimes when I looked up, standing there, arms crossed, not saying a word. No wave, no acknowledgement, nothing. Just watching. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Because what was there to say? By day 18, the hillside looked like itself again. Not perfect, you can't erase something like that completely, but stable, natural, whole. The geotechnical engineer came back out, walked the entire area, checked the grading, the drainage, the reinforcement. Signed off on it. That was it. Done. The road Darren built gone. Like it never existed. A few days after the crew packed up, I saw him backing his boat trailer into his driveway again. Same routine as before. Pull forward, stop, reverse, adjust the wheel, pull forward again. It took him 5 tries that day. I stood there for a second, watching from a distance, not out of spite, just noticing. Nothing had changed for him, except the $63,000. And here's the thing. I thought about pressing further. Criminal charges were on the table. What he did wasn't just civil. There were statutes he crossed that could have taken it to another level. Melissa even asked me about it at one point. You want to push this further? She said. You have the grounds. I remember sitting there, thinking about it longer than I expected. Because part of me wanted to. Not for the money. That was already handled. But for the principle. For the idea that you don't get to make a decision like that on someone else's land and just write a check when it backfires. But then I thought about the 18 days. About him standing on that deck, watching every inch of that shortcut disappear. About the silence. And I realized something. Sometimes, the consequence that sticks isn't the one that hits hardest on paper. It's the one you have to watch happen, slowly, knowing you caused it. So I didn't push for criminal charges. I let it in where it did. Clean. Final. But I'll be honest with you, every now and then, I still wonder if I should have. Not because I regret how it turned out, but because of what it says. About boundaries, about entitlement, about how far someone thinks they can go when they assume nobody's watching. So I'm curious, if you were in my position, would you have stopped where I did? Or would you have taken it all the way? Let me know what you think.